All this goes to show that overhead funding is vital to nonprofits. It is essential for mission delivery. As previously mentioned, all costs that support program activities are essential, including salaries, equipment, training, and supplies. Overhead funding provides core support for programs. Nonprofit programs require administrative support. Program delivery cannot happen if grantors are willing to cover the cost of employee wages, but not the associated payroll taxes. Or if grantors restrict the funds from being used for employee training needed to keep program staff up to date on the skills needed to perform their jobs. It covers important infrastructure cost. Mission delivery takes more than program supplies. Equipment that supports a whole organization is needed for that nonprofit to carry out its day-to-day activities. Staff need computers, copiers, phones, and internet connectivity to do their jobs. The cost of such systems is difficult to trace to a specific activity, but that doesn't mean that these are non-essential to the organization. Overhead cost funds the cost of required reports. Many funders require regular reports to be submitted so that the success of the initiative can be measured. Yet oftentimes the cost for the equipment and staff time that is needed to gather and report on this information is not included in the grant award. The ability to comply with these reporting mandates can make the difference in the nonprofit securing continued and additional funding. But most importantly, overhead funding allows for sustainability. If a nonprofit is continually struggling to cover the cost of program delivery that are not supported by the grants and contracts it is awarded, eventually it will cease to exist. This cycle of nonprofit starvation can be broken only by the organization's ability to secure sufficient and ongoing support of the human resources and infrastructure it takes to carry out a social program. So, we have a few things to keep in mind. First of all, nonprofits have the power to make a difference in their overhead funding. This need not be a matter of, here is our percentage, take it or leave it, when an organization is deciding whether or not to accept grants. Nonprofits have more negotiation power than they may think. Organizations should take decisive action in maximizing current resources. Systems and processes should be reviewed carefully to identify and address inefficiency and waste wherever it is found. Leadership should look for opportunities to seize unrestricted funding, engage the board in a capital campaign, investigate collaborations and differing business models such as fee-for-service. Leave no stone unturned, think outside the box, and every other carpe diem truism that's out there, because more than one approach will often be needed to solve this persistent challenge. So what are the recommendations? First of all, we must work diligently to change funders' expectations of overhead ratios, and we must seek separate funding of overhead through special grants and fundraising campaigns. These are two examples of external solutions. We must engage the board of directors to provide skills, oversight, and financial support to the organization, and we must look to internal innovations that can make the most of current resources and limited G&A budgets. These are examples of answers that can be found internally. So how do we change funders' expectations? First, we need to measure and report costs accurately, honestly, and transparently. Now, this can be scary for organizations at first, as they fear they will be perceived as wasteful and inefficient, and funders will pass them by. However, this is the first step in allowing donors to understand what running programs really costs. We need to encourage grantors and philanthropists to consider the impact nonprofits are having, not just overhead ratios. In this way, the quality of outcomes will become the guiding principle by which nonprofits are measured. Nonprofits should do their best to change their own thinking about overhead. Quit being ashamed of spending money on core support of an organization. For that matter, stop calling it overhead and start referring to it as core support and vital infrastructure. As Vu Lee says, we nonprofits ourselves are unintentionally our own worst enemies. Even the most well-intentioned of us say and do things that perpetuate the myth that overhead is bad. We can't expect funders and donors to support administrative expenses when we unconsciously demonstrate a disdain of it also. Nonprofits should work to secure separate overhead funding. Conduct campaigns and fundraisers. Seek out passionate donors who are willing to provide ongoing support. Ask the surrounding community to fund IT upgrades or provide brick-and-mortar funding. Consider alternative business models. Fee-for-service models can help augment tight overhead funding, while collaborations can provide economies of scale that can help support 2 or more nonprofits with the same level of fixed costs incurred by one. Research separate grants. Though still limited, more and more overhead-specific grants are being offered by grantors. Finally, be creative. Find your own bake sale, whatever works best with the unique mission and environment of the nonprofit. An often under-tapped resource available to nonprofits is their own board of directors. We should require board members to support the organization financially as well as with their time for board meetings. We need to educate our board. An educated board is an effective board. An important job of a board of directors is fiscal oversight because they owe the organization a fiduciary duty. They can best carry out these responsibilities if they are well informed on the unique financial needs and accounting methods used by nonprofits. We need to ask boards to provide expertise and volunteer for special projects within the nonprofit. Have them conduct capital campaigns. Ask them to review internal controls and provide feedback on the effectiveness of those activities. Tap into skills that would otherwise have to be purchased from outside professionals. I cannot say enough about the importance of finding internal innovations. This is the one area that affords nonprofits the most control of overhead costs. When nonprofits begin, they will add services on an as-needed and ad hoc basis. Eventually, inefficiency is built in that needs to be trimmed back. Technology is one example. Copiers or computers are needed, and so are purchased on the fly from this company or that. However, when needs reach a certain level, using one vendor for the organization can allow for quantity discounts and more generous terms. We need to review current systems, especially paper-based and manual systems. Many times these can be automated so that labor costs surrounding the activities can be reduced, freeing up staff for other tasks. This allows organizations to extend the time that older systems can be used before a full upgrade will be required. We need to analyze, scrutinize, and critique current costs to reduce waste wherever possible. We need to carefully analyze large outlays before incurring them. We need to look for ways to do more with less. But we must be cautious in doing this. These innovations are great for short-term solutions, but should not be considered as permanent answers, because doing so can cause staff burnout, low morale, and increased turnover. In the end, the only way the challenge of underfunded overhead costs will be overcome is to move the thinking, the perspective of funders, donors, and nonprofits themselves. To stop thinking of overhead and fundraising as taking away from the pie, and instead as being the core support for the mission of the nonprofit. We must stop viewing some costs as good and others as bad, and instead realize that all costs related to service delivery are important. We should stop using efficiency ratios as a measurement of the worth of an organization and instead look at the quality of services and the overall impact the nonprofit is having in the community. As quoted at the beginning of this presentation, we must apply new thinking to old problems, processes, and systems in order to solve the challenges nonprofits face today. Thank you.